Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of Carefulist, the podcast. We are so privileged to welcome Kunal Parikh with us today. He is an aging and health advocate, as well as a digital health strategist and physician. Welcome, Kunal.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be on your podcast today.
I am really looking forward to this conversation. We have so many good topics to talk about. But let's start at the beginning. What is your caregiving story? How did you get into this area of interest?
So, I was born and raised in India. We inherently have a collectivist culture, and that's to say, I lived with my parents and grandparents. I'm fully aware that if I say that in the Western world, that I live with my parents when I'm 26, it would raise so many eyebrows, but that was just a normal rhythm in India. Now, having grown up so closely with my grandmothers, I have a really strong bond with both of them. I think in about 2010 or 2011, my paternal grandmother had a fall. My heart sank, and I think I can speak on behalf of the whole family. Um, Everyone was just extremely worried.
Yeah.
She broke her hip, immediately had surgery, and we got her rehab and physio, and she was able to walk.
Mhm.
Obviously, she was advised to use a walker or at least a cane, but according to her, it made her look old.
Oh.
She used someone's arm as support or just a
Mhm.
raise, but very rarely a mobility aid.
Mhm.
And as you can imagine, that shrunk her world significantly.
Yeah.
Parents, sister, and I would spend quality time in the evenings with her. I secretly smuggled ice cream into the home for her because our household was always really one focused on healthy food. I
Mhm.
organized her pills. I recall getting irritated and mad when she would not take them on time. I would
Mhm.
occasionally take her to the temple. And in 2018, I moved to Canada to broaden my career horizons. Now,
Mhm.
at this point, I was on track in India to have a sustainable and a safe career as a physician, but I really wanted to explore the role of technology in enhancing patient safety and quality improvement initiatives. So after that, it was a lot of video calls with my grandmothers.
Mhm.
As you can imagine, I had tons of other things going on. I mean, who knew living on your own could be so exhausting and expensive? So I was mainly providing emotional support to my grandmothers more than physical and tactical.
Yeah.
Now, my grandmother's health took a turn for the worse in 2022. She had another fall,
Oh.
and surgery was too risky.
Mhm.
So she could not walk anymore. My parents decided to hire an in-house or a live-in personal support worker who could help with activities of daily care.
Mhm.
Later, she developed aphasia, so video calls looked slightly different. It was
Yeah.
most me talking about what I'm up to or what I'm doing, and her nodding along, I'm sure, with a lot of love and pride.
Yeah.
She
Can I'm
fashioned
sorry to interrupt you. Can
yeah,
you explain what aphasia is for the folks who may not know?
absolutely. So aphasia was her brain was impacted, so she could understand what others are saying. She has thought processes in her mind, but she cannot use words to express what she wants to say. So she can use expressions and nonverbal communication to a certain extent, but
Mhm.
actual words were completely off limits. She
Yeah.
could not use them.
Okay. Thank you for explaining that. And I'm sorry. My mom had aphasia as well with dementia.
It gets difficult, right? Because
Yeah.
at certain points in time, I just wanted to know that she was doing okay, and
Yeah.
she was feeling okay more than anything. But
Right.
it, I just could never hear the words. In
Yeah.
that time, though, what worked for me and her and my family technically was we asked a lot of leading questions. We didn't ask, do you want food? Do you want to have noodles? Yes or no. So it was a lot of leading questions, and that got us through a lot of guesswork, getting that out
Yeah,
of the way.
right. That's really good advice for anybody who might be experiencing that.
Thank you. Uh, she passed away in 2023, but
I'm
I
sorry.
firmly believe that she's forever there. She's
Mhm.
always there looking after all of us and just her spirits in the world.
Yeah.
So, when I reflect on my experiences and relationships, there are two realizations that stare point blank at me.
Hmm.
First was, if someone would have told me at that point in time that I was a caregiver back then when I was in India, I would have laughed in their face. Like, no, it's probably my mom. Uh,
Yeah.
have this enigmatic image of who a caregiver is. Someone responsible and someone mature and someone hands-on and someone who's always present. But we know that's not true.
Hmm.
And then the second thing was I started looking into the concept of long distance caregiving.
Hmm.
Because I am physically located far away does not mean
Yeah.
that I do not care or I do not care. It's actually quite the opposite. It just means that the nature of the things I do or the nature of the care that I provide changes. And
Right.
to kind of extrapolate that a little bit, there are so many um, individuals who help their parents move into residential facilities or long-term care facilities. And suddenly, the expectation is that you're no longer a caregiver, but that's just so not true. You're
Hmm.
still managing duties, you're still managing their finances, you're probably still providing emotional support. In fact, you have an opportunity to provide better emotional support now that the physical tasks are out of the way. So
Yep.
it's just that the nature of care that we provide is fluid, but
Hmm.
caregiving is a constant.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I think it is so, and we can dive into this if you'd like, um, pertinent that people understand that caregiving is not what you think it is. It is so much broader.
Exactly. So when I say caregiving, a lot of my colleagues and even people in the aging industry who have been in the space for a while tend to think of, bathing someone and dressing someone and helping them with mobility and that kind of stuff. And
Mhm.
yes, that is a vital part of caregiving, but it's just the tip of the iceberg, what's most visible. There's so many intangible aspects of caregiving. There's emotional component, being there for someone, being a friendly face in a crowded room, being that
Mhm.
social support, planning an outing with them, or sometimes it involves financial and legal matters or navigating the complexities of healthcare. And
Mhm.
all in all, most of the time, it just means being there.
Yes. Yes. At the end of the day, they really just want you, right?
Exactly.
And most people are able to gravitate toward the things that they are naturally inclined to anyway. So you were a continent away, but you were still providing that relationship and that emotional support that they looked for and loved from you when you were in the home with them. Um,
For sure.
I did the same with my mom. I mean, I wasn't a continent away. I was a state away and I could still get there pretty easily, but I couldn't get there every day. I couldn't get there every week. So being able to have the phone calls and being the communicator of the bunch, I took that role on happily.
Absolutely. We naturally become project managers all of a sudden,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
It, for me, a lot of reconciliation needed to happen as well. I was
Mhm.
feeling very proud that I'm achieving so much in my career and I'm making strides. And at the same time, uh, the very people who inspired me to go on this journey, I'm probably not physically there with them. So there was that little bit of guilt. And
Yeah.
I talked it out with them. I talked about it with my parents as well. And
Mhm.
it's just addressing those things that makes you feel a lot lighter, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And coming from a parental perspective, I have kids. I know parents want their kids to go live their life. They
Hmm.
want you to be happy and healthy and successful in the way that you define success, right?
Hmm.
So it's a gift for them to see you doing that.
For sure. I fully agree. I think it's every time I talked about uh, new things that I'm doing, new projects that I'm taking on, it just gave such a sense of pride to my parents and my grandmothers. It,
Yeah,
they thrive on it, and
right.
it's so nice and gratifying to see that.
Yeah. Well, and it gives them something to talk about too, right?
Oh yeah, that they can hold their heads up high, and
Yeah.
society is a big thing in India. It's their social capital uh, goes a little higher up with every new thing I do, and that just makes me happy as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's excellent. So while we're talking about things that make us happy, I know a lot of people have a hard time finding joy or finding a sense of humor in caregiving because it can be very, very difficult and isolating. Um, do you have any stories or any little secrets that you had to maintaining joy and finding humor?
I don't think it's so much of a secret per se, but I can share some stories about what brought humor in
Yeah.
care. So, one thing that I think is a myth is that caregiving is only morbid or taxing. Yes, a lot of caregiving is that, but then
Mhm.
it's not only morbid or taxing. My
Yeah.
partner's uncle got diagnosed with lung cancer about 2 years ago. That had spread to the liver. At that point of time, he was given 6 months to live. The doctor had said, we expect that within 6 months, he should pass away peacefully
Mhm.
and provide comfort measures and so on and so forth. However, he had a brain injury in his early adulthood that led to cognitive impairment. His family described it as his memory short circuits every 15 minutes,
Wow.
means that he forgets that he has a cancer diagnosis. So he avoided the entire emotional turmoil that comes with the diagnosis, with a
Yeah.
diagnosis so terminal, that's so literally morbid.
Yeah.
And as a family, we think that is the reason he outlived the 6 months for about 2 years.
Wow.
He kept forgetting that he has
Yeah.
cancer. He realized, but wait a second, why do we need to remind him that he has cancer? Let's care for him
Hmm.
without approaching the topic of cancer with him at all.
Hmm.
All of this was going on, but then he had a fall at his group home and he
Hmm.
was transferred to emergency in March of last year. And that was the true beginning of the end.
Yeah.
Since I was the medical person in the family, I was fortunate to care for him and help my partner's family navigate the complexities of the healthcare system in Canada.
Hmm.
The challenges that all of us caregivers faced while caring for him kind of transformed into humor. figured out that he needed to be bribed with Coke to take his pills or get his sling readjusted, or frankly, even get a bed bath because he was starting to smell ripe on a few days.
Yeah.
We constantly needed to remind him that it's
Mm,
inappropriate to make jokes of a certain nature around a
yeah.
child. We laughed about how every time he gets a new nurse, we needed to explain the context of his illness and his memory resetting and all. So every
Yeah.
time we had a, oh, here we go again moment, we learned to channel it into humor and resilience, honestly.
Right. Yes.
But honestly, if that was happening to me by myself or me alone or to anyone by themselves in a corner or in a silo,
Mm,
it can get so depressing and it can get so overwhelming and inundating. So I'm so grateful that all of us caregivers went through this together and it was not
yeah.
a single person because that can get so much.
Right. Yeah. What is funny in a group can be frustrating alone. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because when you're in a group, you're all going through the same thing, and it's almost like trauma bonding, and we can
Yes.
joke about the same thing, and
Right.
we can learn to laugh at the situation. If you're by
Hmm.
yourself, uh, it's not quite as easy.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's harder to see what's funny, and it's not quite as fun to laugh by yourself, although I've done that as well.
Good on you, Katie. I still need to learn how to make lemonade out of lemons by myself.
Yeah. Sometimes that's you spoke of resilience. Sometimes that's the only path through. Just finding the funny.
Yep.
Well, okay. So we've talked about how to find joy and funny and all of those things. So you've had this amazing path from India and growing up there in a multi-generational environment to coming to Canada as a physician and then moving into digital health and strategy and that space. So where does that leave you now in your caregiving journey? What's happening there?
I think my caregiving journey continues to evolve
Mhm.
and it forever will be an ongoing and transforming path. At this point, I still consider myself as a long distance caregiver to my maternal grandmother and my parents. And at the same time, I have a partner, so I consider myself a caregiver to his parents.
Mhm.
It could be just as simple as calling them to check in on them, how their health is, how
Mhm.
their week has been. My mom did a marathon this week, so it was a lot of, Mom, please make sure you're using the massage gun that I got you because you
Yeah.
need to stretch. It's a lot of constant conversation and back and forth with the people that I'm providing care to.
Yeah.
Having said that, there's also a lot of my own boundaries that I need to respect. I am
Yes.
I'm currently a senior systems analyst at the Ottawa Hospital. I am a professor at Algonquin College. I am trying to set up my own consultancy. There's a lot of things, a lot of moving pieces in my own life. So I
Yeah.
can't be as much in touch with them as I would like to be. However, I make time as much as I can, and I'm
Mhm.
satisfied with that. So it's
Yeah.
striking that balance between I want to do it all and oh no, but I don't have time to do it all, so I'm going to do none of it. It's striking that intermediate
Right.
balance between those two extremes.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I would imagine, and I've spoken with some other folks about this too, people who have certain training that not everyone has. So nurses and clinical social workers and things. So I would imagine with your training as a physician, you also are getting lots of questions from friends and family for advice on things. And, that can be a drain on your mental capacity for
It
the
be-
other things that you want to do.
it almost becomes a party trick when
Yeah.
I love to host dinner parties. I love to get my people around, uh,
Yeah.
and family and so on and so forth. And it's just a matter of time until someone's like, "Hey, but I have a rash. Hey, but I've been having this pain in my knuckles or my
Yeah.
ankle," and it just becomes a party trick. I have to just tell everyone whatever information or advice I give you after 2 glasses of wine, take it at your own discretion.
Right. The doctor is out.
Yeah. Yes, the doctor's officially out.
Oh, that's funny. When we spoke before, and I think the audience knows this now, I talk to everybody before they come onto the podcast. Um, you had mentioned a book that you really enjoyed, and it was called You Look Good for Your Age. Can you tell the audience about it? I've listed it on our website. So if anybody's interested in checking it out, you can go to carefulist.com.
I am such a fan of that book. I found the book just out of the blue at Indigo, and my first reflex when I saw the book was the title, which says, "You look good for your age." And my knee-jerk reaction was, that is not okay to say. But that's exactly what the satirical title of the book is about and what it aims to invoke. There is
Mhm.
just so much inherent and pervasive ageism that
Yeah.
affects all else in our society. There's an innate expectation to look a certain way and behave a certain way.
Mhm.
Old age has been denigrated to such a degree that we go out of our way to look younger than we actually are. If you don't agree with me, just go to any pharmacy store and to the cosmetics section, and you will see aisles and aisles of anti-aging products. Why
Mhm.
not look our own age? And honestly, this ageism affects women more than men. I started getting gray hair when I was 27, and I decided to stop dyeing them when I turned 30. I got tons of compliments around the time about my white streak of hair making me look more distinguished and credible. And at the very same time, my grandmother, 86 years old, still refuses to wear hearing aids because it makes her look old. So to me, the game just seems rigged. Older men are called sexy, while older women are called crones. It makes me furious. And this book is an anthology of stories and poems that exactly convey this ethos. It talks about these hypocrisies and systemic inequalities that affect older adults. It
Mhm.
speaks intersectionality, how different forms of marginalization can add up, be it gender or sexual orientation, race, socioeconomic status, education, so on and so forth.
Mhm.
Example, the experience of aging is different for an older white woman as opposed to an older Latino woman. And
Yeah.
again, that's going to change if the woman is lesbian. So there's just so many variables that the book touches on. It really exemplifies this feminist lens of ethics and helps people make sense of these inequities in aging because it's not men versus women, it's not older versus younger, it's unearned privilege versus unearned disadvantage. It's the
Yeah.
system that we want to go for. It's not the young people or it's not someone we're going after. It's the system that needs to change.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's such an important point when you take that perspective and you apply it to the experience at the doctor's office.
Hmm.
what questions you ask and how they are answered, how much time you are given to be able to ask questions, and the types of answers you receive. And I think most people who've accompanied an older adult to an appointment, you know that the doctor more often than not talks to you than talks to the person who is actually the patient.
Exactly. And that is a gap in in my humble opinion in the medical training curriculum. It,
Mhm.
we teach, I underwent so much training on diagnostics, surgical skills, and anything and everything that pertains to clinical care. What people fail to teach doctors is communication, uh, ethics, psychosocial behaviors, and all of that needs to be a part of the medical training curriculum. It- just because someone is old does not mean that they've lost their senses. They are still present. Address them. It just makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not the same, excuse me, as being in a pediatrician's office where you have a 2-year-old who isn't going to listen and doesn't care and doesn't want to be, it's not the same thing.
Exactly. There's a lot of conflation that happens between older adults and children. You'll see these almost folklore stories that talk about, oh, when someone's getting old, it's almost like they're going back to their childhood, or they start behaving like a child. But that's so wrong. Yes, when someone's getting older, they might have increasing care needs, but that does not mean that they become a child again. Their agency is still preserved. They they've accumulated a wealth of knowledge and experience and expertise, and they must be respected as such for it.
Yes. Yes. I recently read Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. And one of the things I loved that he said, excuse me, was about how in Indian culture, people who are older are so revered. And, you go to them as the wise one who has lived all this life and has all of this experience. And so much of the Western world is looking to put that off and hide it.
Mhm.
And it's so unfortunate because you lose out on the experience of learning decades of information through someone else's eyes if you just look at them and go, oh, well, you need help with XYZ. What could you possibly know? And it does them such a disservice.
It's one of the key reasons why that shift is happening or has happened is we have overemphasized the concept of independence and radical autonomy. It's almost like, oh, I'm gonna do what suits me best. What we tend to forget is we do live in a society. We live in this web of intricate interdependencies with other individuals. And there's always going to be that ripple effect of my action onto others. So, in that case, are we truly independent at all, or were we? We're all just so dependent on each other. And that's a beautiful
Yeah,
thing. That's
right.
the philosophy of caregiving. We're all caregivers and receivers all at the same time. It's just constantly evolving.
Yeah. And so that brings me to my next question and my next thought, which is you are in Canada, you are from India, you've also spent a fair amount of time here in the States. There are similarities, of course, in caregiving, no matter where you live in the world. Um, and I think one of the biggest similarities is how unprepared most people are to become a caregiver. And so I'm curious, for the people who are not yet caregivers or they're very early on in their journey and they just discovered this podcast and they're like, help me. What would you say to those people?
So let me begin off by saying that I fully agree. Caregiving is not talked about nearly as much as it is being done. It's like air all around us, but so invisible. But if you are an early caregiver, or not even if you don't consider yourself a caregiver yet, but you think you will be one in the future, let me say one thing. Care is not something that is optional in our lives.
Yeah.
It is the natural rhythm of our relationships and daily interactions. So, the first thing that I would advise is recognize these patterns in your current relationships. Who do you provide care to? Who is providing care to you? Initiate this conversation about care with them. Understand their preferences so that you're not left guessing what they would want. Speaking about care really ensures that it is not taken for granted.
Mhm.
That's my first one. Second one, set up your support network. Let's say you're providing care to your parents, but then so is your sibling, and so are their friends, and so are their neighbors. When
Mhm.
I say caregiving is a lifeline of our relationships, it holds true across all of society. Speak to your fellow caregivers about how you can divide the care among yourselves. Let your guard down, be vulnerable, and ask for help.
Yes.
It's so difficult to ask for help, but you got to learn how to do it.
Yeah.
Mm.
Absolutely.
Um, then third, you got to acknowledge your own boundaries. I speak about this a lot. It is so easy to be swept up in your care duties. It is so easy to have caregiving consume your entire identity. So set your guardrails, prioritize self care. Uh, Self care does not always have to mean, an hour-long bubble bath or a massage at the spa. It certainly could, and it
Yeah.
certainly, but sometimes even just a 5-minute phone call to a friend is the best form of self-care. Identify what that looks like for you. Make sure you have emotional support uh, from counseling, support groups, online caregiver communities. As a social experiment, just look up the area agency of aging in your service area, and you'll find a ton of resources there as well. But all in all, be clear about what your non negotiables are. Discuss a long term care facility with your care recipient if you're at your limit. Whatever your boundary is, be true to yourself and uphold these boundaries because ultimately you cannot pour from an empty bucket. So you need to prevent yourself from depleting.
Mhm. Yes. Those are all really, really good points. And for anyone who is looking for additional information on area, um, oh, I'm blanking on aging.
Area agencies on aging,
Thank
AAA.
you. I always get them out of order. I have it on the website, so you can find it on carefulist.com. Um,
So glad
so
that
sorry.
I'm so glad that you've created this amazing repository of resources for caregivers because it's very overwhelming even for someone who has experience in the caregiving space when you become uh, like an imminent caregiver when you're in that fire you don't need people telling you, oh, but you know what, you can do this or that. You need resources, you need tangible lists, and that's such a good job you're doing.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And as always, I'll take this moment to remind the audience if you have recommendations on resources or products or anything, please contact me and let me know so that I can add it to the site. Um, so, one of the things you talked about in a video that you shared on LinkedIn some time ago, um, that I thought was really interesting was the concept of telescoping. Can you tell us about that? And I think it will help people to frame how they are feeling about caregiving.
Absolutely. If so, when you're a caregiver, it often feels like you're living in two timelines at once. There are days when time compresses and everything is about immediate needs. Other days, it expands, forcing you to think far into the future. And this phenomenon is called telescoping of time, the constant shifting between the here and now and there and then. And that's such a hidden challenge of caregiving because it's not just about logistics, it's about navigating emotions, managing resilience, and finding hope for what's to come. Let me give you an example. When I was caring for my partner's uncle, as I said, towards the end of his life, the focal issue frequently was how to get him to eat some nutritious food. Answer, bribe him with protein milkshakes for dessert because he liked those. It
Mhm,
felt like a small victory at that in that moment in time, but then at the same time, every single day, the whole family had a conversation, or we used to call them meetings, around how to best transition him from a long-term care facility that could to a long-term care facility that could cater to all of his needs. And
mhm.
suddenly, time does not feel that small anymore. And this constant shrinking and expansion of time that caregivers perceive is telescoping. Now, why do we want to name everything? Why do we want to put labels on everything? The point is, when you're looking at a caregiver intervention, you need to make sure that that intervention addresses both the immediate and the long term. They should be tools for resilience today and hope for tomorrow.
Mhm.
Caregiver, you need to make decisions in the moment and for the long term. And this is a delicate balance that comes with prioritization and honestly, just tapping into the experience of other caregivers. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of your community of caregivers and others with similar lived experiences. Talk about your experiences, listen to these podcasts so that you don't have to go through the same emotional turbulence that someone has already gone through.
Yes. And the reason I asked you to talk about telescoping specifically was because I didn't have a term for it when I was going through it. And when I saw your video, I thought this would have been so much easier to explain to people if I had knowledge of telescoping theory and terminology. When you hear it, it's so simple and it makes so much sense. But when you're bogged down in it, when we were dealing with my mom's dementia and the here and now of that, and the what's to come with, her continued loss of um, abilities, both physical and mental and everything in between, then snapping back to current because working full time and raising kids. And it was this constant state of whiplash, is how I explained it to people because I didn't know how else to do it. But I love telescoping so much because whiplash is how it feels.
Mhm.
But telescoping is so descriptive because of how focused you are in on that thing at the time, right?
It, you're so right. It does feel like whiplash. It's the back and forth, and it's so disorienting at times as well.
Yes.
Sometimes it gets complicated when a decision you make right now might have like long-term ramifications as well. And that's when the two lens of the telescope kind of come clashing together.
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
caregiving is complex. Caregiving is such a journey.
Caregiving. Whoa, well, I have a lot of words for caregiving. They're not all safe for work.
I
It's
feel that,
wonderful and it's difficult, and we'll leave it at that.
yeah, for sure.
Um, so one of the fascinating things, and you touched on this a little bit earlier in our conversation, is how many people are caregivers that don't realize they're caregivers or haven't themselves put the label on what they're doing as being caregivers. And this is especially true for the LGBTQIA plus
Mm.
community. Can you talk a little bit about that, and particularly to folks in that community who are listening who are probably caregivers and don't even realize it?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. So when you're not directly related to the person that you're caring for, it becomes even more unlikely that you would identify as a caregiver. And as you said, this is so true for the LGBTQ community. Please notice that I did say LGBTQ community. It's a whole,
Yes.
it's a full acronym. Older
Right.
members of the community likely witnessed an era where their identity was criminalized. The Stonewall era. A lot of them lost touch with their families who, air quotes, disowned them. A lot of them did not have children. So, unless they have a spouse who may or may not be afforded the same benefits as in a heterosexual marriage, they do not have a conventional support system, but they do have
Right.
what they call a chosen family. Now, this could be friends, this could be neighbors, fellow members of the senior center, whatever that might look like, but that is the reality. And do they see themselves as caregivers? Chances are most likely not. And this also applies to older individuals living without children. Did you
Mhm.
know, Katie, that 1 in 6 older adults in the States right now do not have next of kin? So
Wow,
all
I did not know the number was that high.
1 in 6.
Wow.
So this really re-emphasizes the role and the value of community and care in our day-to-day lives because caregiving is pervasive and
Mhm.
omnipresent. So where do we go from here? It we've established that there are so many of these hidden caregivers or pun intended closeted caregivers. Uh, that's definitely a funny pun. I take pride in it.
I
Um,
love it. You should.
uh, but where do we go from here? I think one of the things that we should be doing is increase the representation of caregiving in media and politics and policy making circles. Um,
Mhm.
there's a new document. I don't think it's a documentary, but it's a new series by Bradley Cooper that's coming out, and it's called Caregiving. And I'm so excited about it because it showcases this everyday phenomenon and
Yes.
puts a spotlight on it. It's so important to discuss this openly and proudly and out and about, shout it from the mountaintops because we're all doing it to a certain extent. We can
Mhm.
all use a little bit of support. Why are we not talking about it? Why are we
Right.
all just being the anonymous ones? Let's reach out to each other. Let's make sure we're helping each other in our caregiving journeys. And it just would be such a snowball of kindness and compassion and positive health all across.
Yes. I completely agree. I one of my mom's very good friends, um, she was so wonderful. She visited regularly. She brought snacks. She would sit with my mom even when my mom couldn't talk or respond in any way. She would read to her. She would give her, the update on all the gossip and all of that stuff. She would never have considered herself a caregiver. She was just being a friend. But it's so much. more than that. And so for people who, if you heard the things I just said, visiting a friend, sitting and talking with them, bringing a snack, that is caregiving. It's just showing love to the people you love. That's what caregiving is.
One thing that I'm gonna tell all of you listeners is if you're listening to this podcast, The Carefulest, chances are you consider yourself a caregiver. Can we please kindly request you to share this with someone who you can see is a caregiver, but they don't see themselves as a caregiver? Even
Yes.
if you share this with one other person, it's a chain reaction. It's gonna change so many lives because of just one simple fact, and which is self-identification as a caregiver. Please do this as an act of kindness for the people that you love.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that leads me into my next and final thing that we'll talk about here is that you have some really exciting news based on a conversation you've had about telling people who are caregivers that don't know that they're caregivers. Talk about it, please.
Thank you so much, Katie. I'm so excited that I was selected to be a speaker at the TEDx Mechanicsville event in Ottawa. That's where I live. And my
Mhm.
topic was, did you know you are a caregiver? It is a topic that is very close to my heart and that I've done research on, that I've had tons of experience in. Over the last 5 years, I have worked with several different kinds of senior serving organizations, area agencies on aging, state units of aging, health systems, health plans, skilled nursing facilities, you name it. And across all of these settings, there was a central theme that stood out. The organizations that scaled the interventions for caregivers successfully had one key factor in common, whether caregivers in their service area recognized their vital role or not.
Mm.
And that's where I saw the gap. We're innovating rapidly, but we're not addressing the most fundamental determinant of success.
Yes.
Caregivers do so much, often without acknowledgement.
Mhm.
Caregivers view themselves solely as a dutiful son, loving spouse, or a good neighbor. uh, they're not going to have the same lens of long-term care safety of the care recipient. And by extension, they're less likely to seek out or access caregiver interventions.
Mhm.
When I knew it's not just about scaling solutions, it's about creating this social change. It's about sparking a dialogue. It's about enhancing representation. And that's the main why, or that's the main reason why I took on to the TEDx stage with Did You Know You Are a Caregiver? Now, this is available on the official TED website. It is free of cost to view, and I highly encourage everyone to take 15 minutes of your life to watch it. There were so many attendees, Katie, who reached out to me after the event and said that they were unaware of their caregiving role, and listening to the talk exposed that blind spot for them. And that's exactly the impact that I was hoping it would have.
Yes. Well, it's such an important topic, and I can't imagine someone more qualified and perfect to deliver that message than you and the way that you delivered it because there is, oh, how do I want to say this? People are so reluctant to acknowledge what they're feeling and what they're going through.
Mhm.
And the way you break out the message makes it so easy to see yourself in it. And
Thank
so I would strongly recommend um, finding the TEDx, and I will figure out somewhere on my site to make it easy for people to find. And also sharing that with anyone that you know who has a new diagnosis or has aging parents, because even People who are healthy eventually need care.
Mhm. Uh, That's very kind of you to say, Katie. I really appreciate it. I think one of the last things or one of the last thoughts that I have is um, caregiving is the foundation of our relationships. We're all providing and receiving care, and
Yes,
the sooner that we accept it, acknowledge it, uh, the better we're going to get at it.
that's right. That's right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today and having this wonderful conversation about caregiving and whether you are a caregiver. But if you're listening, you are, and you know you are. So, any recommendations that you have, any resource needs that you have, if you're looking for things that you can't find, please do contact us and we will see what we can get for you. You can do that at www.carefulist.com. Take care.